name is Ryan Kester, and today I'm going to be going over inequality in America and its effects on society. Inequality for All tells us that the main cause of our current economic inequality in the U.S. stems from the fact that America is a consumer-central economy. You may be thinking, that's not a problem, and you'd be right. The heart of the problem comes from the fact that the vast middle class doesn't have the money to spend in order to keep the economy strong. Reich continues on by stating and showing statistics on how middle-class incomes have stagnated or even dropped since the 1970s. Similarly, wages in the past 5 years have struggled to stay above the rate of inflation, and recently have been seen to fall below this rate. Workers are forced to take up these jobs in order to make some income because they face housing and insurance payments, childcare, and education costs. Then, when workers can finally collect their meager payments, most of it is taken away for necessities, which leaves little money left to pay for new consumer products. According to Kimberly Amadeo in Income Inequality in America, 1/4 of American workers make less than $10 per hour, which creates an income below the federal poverty level. Furthermore, in The Guardian, they state 80% of Americans say they live paycheck to paycheck. This helps illustrate the large number of people who don't make enough to keep a consumer-driven economy strong. In addition, Kimberly continues showing the negative effects of inequality when she states, the rich got richer through the recovery of 2008 financial crisis. In 2012, the top 10% of earners took home 50% of all income. That's the highest percent in the last 100 years. The top 1% took home 20% of the income. This shows the high accumulation of wealth top earners have been able to gain control of. In turn, there isn't much, if any, money left over for the average majority. This is important to be aware of because wealth accumulation amplifies the effect of inequality as wealth builds off itself. To understand this concept better, we can look to Brian Keeley's paper Income Inequality, the Gap Between Rich and Poor, where he shows how, a quarter of a century ago, the average disposable income of the richest 10% in OECD countries was around 7 times higher than that of the poorest 10%. Today, it's around 9.5 times higher. And so we can see that the gap between the rich and poor is widening. But was this always the case? Reich says no, and points out how each time the income share of the richest 1% ballooned, government policies at the time made accumulation much easier. Matthew Johnson helps us to understand these policies when he writes, not surprisingly, this rise in income inequality also closely mirrors a reduction in top marginal tax rates starting in 1921. As wealth began to concentrate in certain areas, a bubble formed, so it was only a matter of time before it popped. This is exactly what happened in the 1930s and more recently in 2008. In a system like this, where the mega rich can easily reinvest their earnings to have even greater buying power, it's no wonder society has become so unequal in incomes. The government doesn't do enough redistribution through taxes, and so many are left living lives of poverty and suffering greatly for it. This infographic helps to illustrate the different impacts that inequality has on a society. As I briefly hit on before, high inequality followed the lowering of top marginal tax rates. This occurred both in the 1930s and in 2008. These tax decreases make it much easier to maintain wealth and means that redistribution through taxes can't accommodate everybody as it's meant to. In 2013, 400 Americans had more wealth than half the U.S. This means that less than 0.001% of the population controlled over 50% of the nation's GDP. This is further exacerbated by the fact that wages have been stagnant for many decades and inflation rates have started to rise above wages. The most apparent and possibly most important effect that inequality has is on incomes. This might seem obvious, but income inequality is one of the more detrimental effects of inequality because it causes stress. Stress is the root cause as to why smart people can and are often seen making very bad decisions. As you can see, the U.S. is rated higher at around 36% for income inequality, which is far above many other developed countries such as Norway and Canada, to name a few. In addition, the rich don't proportionately buy more than the poor, because everyone has necessities needed to live. Having a consumer-driven economy that doesn't pay workers high enough wages to buy additional goods is like having a car that's constantly filled with gas but has no gas pedal. There isn't enough money spread out across the nation to facilitate more spending, and so the economy is missing out on a lot of potential growth. This brings us to the negative effects and impacts that inequality has on education in a nation. As you can see here, the US also ranks highly, meaning that many students are doing worse now than they would be in an otherwise equal society. Out of 34 OECD countries, the US ranks 14th in reading skills, 17th in science, and 25th in math. Now, children being less successful in school means that they're going to be less likely to become high-skilled workers in the future who are able to bring themselves out of poverty. Furthermore, this kind of inequality can reduce school performance through a type of segregation effect where those who don't do well educationally are grouped together. This only further causes more negative effects. Now we can see how income inequality affects the relative health of a nation as well. Yet again, the US ranks near the top for inequality in life expectancy. This means that people in unequal societies live shorter lives, which is crazy to think about in a highly developed country like this. There is also increased rates of children dying in infancy in societies of unequal pay. There is also a myriad of other health problems associated with income inequality. Obesity is much more common, and in fact, the United States has the highest obesity rates of all OECD countries. Mental illness has also been found to be more common in unequal societies, as well as rates of teen pregnancy. And so, from this, we can see the variety of negative effects that come along with inequality and why. Inequality stems from policies that disproportionately benefit certain groups over others, and unfortunately, these large groups are often benefiting from policies at the detriment of others. This causes wealth to accumulate in certain areas, which leaves less for the average person. Average workers' wages become stagnant, and the health of our nation begins to decline as the middle class isn't able to spend enough to keep our economy strong. Unless the government changes its policies on predistribution and redistribution, I'm afraid the average worker will have to take the brunt of the effects indefinitely.